I was such an internet kid. The internet is really what I claim as my home. Like, if you ask me where I'm from, I say the internet.
Los Angeles police investigating how a badly decomposed body ended up inside the trunk of an impounded Tesla.
Investigators say the car is registered to singer and songwriter David, who rose to fame with hits on TikTok.
Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a missing teenager in California whose body was discovered in a Tesla that belongs to R&B singer David.
Celeste did not end up there naturally. Somebody put her in that front trunk.
She was found a day after she would have turned 15 years old. But the question is, and the mystery here, is what was going on before she ended up in that car.
Where there's smoke, there is usually fire. And when there's a dead body in someone's car, that is some serious smoke.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Inside the Mind with me, Jared Mola. I've been out for a couple weeks, but I'm happy to be back, and I appreciate you being here. We have a lot to get into in this episode. Today, we are talking about the David case. I don't know if I can call it a case. I don't think it is one yet. And we will talk more about why I think it will potentially develop into a case here soon. But this story is one that's been stuck in my head ever since the news broke. That news being the discovery of human remains in the front trunk of an abandoned Tesla registered to the rising music star, David. Those remains were later identified belonging to Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a 14-year-old from Lake Elsinore, California, who had been missing for nearly a year prior to her remains being discovered. It's a story that I've been eager to come on here and talk about because there is so much information to unpack and go through. And things are continuing to develop by the day, by the hour, by the minute, it seems like. And there will certainly be even more information that comes out even after this episode is posted. So we will, of course, stay tuned for any updates. But today we are talking about David, which is his artist name spelled D4VD, also known as David Anthony Burke. We are talking about the victim in this story, 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Again, her remains were discovered in the front trunk of a Tesla belonging to David. Now, there are a ton of people talking about this story, covering this story, and rightfully so. This is a high-profile story surrounding an extremely popular music star, but I want to break down this episode into 3 parts. Firstly, I want to talk through why I believe the police haven't made an arrest yet and what other information they have released in regards to David cooperating with law enforcement. I then want to focus on the Tesla and what we could potentially gain from the digital footprint associated with that vehicle she was found in. Finally, we'll dive into the confirmed connection between David and Celeste that we are learning more and more about. So if you've been on social media at all, you have most likely heard about this story. And earlier I mentioned that I don't really feel that I can refer to it as a case because truthfully, there really isn't one yet because there haven't been any arrests made. At least at the time of this recording, there haven't been. But for those who are just catching up on this case, the remains of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez were discovered in the front trunk of David's Tesla. The Tesla had been marked abandoned for some time and eventually towed to a tow yard. And upon the arrival of the Tesla, tow yard employees noticed a very strong foul-like odor coming from the vehicle that then prompted them to call law enforcement. And that is when they discovered the remains inside this front trunk. It obviously sparked a huge investigation into how she ended up there in the first place. And although the car was registered to this music star, David, he has never been named a suspect or a person of interest. So that's just a small snapshot to set us up here. We will dive into more of the details of the timeline of events in a little, but no arrests have been made at this time. And that brings us to our first question here, and it's a question that's always been one of the biggest questions surrounding all of this, and that is, why hasn't there been an arrest yet? Well, this entire investigation is being conducted by the Robbery and Homicide Division of the LAPD, and I can tell you that my speculation is leaning towards them being thorough, and they are likely taking their time before making an arrest because once an arrest is made, there is a time clock attached to that in terms of filing charges, starting a speedy trial process, because the clock on that speedy trial starts the second they take someone in to custody. And from what I understand, in the state of California, where this is all happening, we're talking about a 48-hour window to file charges. So with that being said, I can see why they are prioritizing being thorough with this investigation, taking their time to make sure they don't leave any stone unturned before making an arrest. And the digital evidence in this case is going to be key, especially when we talk about the connection between David and Celeste. But it is going to take some time to get all the search warrants for all the social media platforms that they may have been contacting each other through, whether it be Snapchat, Instagram, Discord, Roblox. It's just going to take time to go through all of that evidence and make sure they have what they need. But in reality, I believe they are holding off on making an arrest, mostly because they don't have an official cause of death as of right now. And we will get more into what the medical examiners released about Celeste's death, but there was no official cause of death determined. And without that, it's extremely difficult to build a convincing case to bring into a courtroom when you don't have that definitive cause of death. It reminds me a little bit of the Casey Anthony case when they found Casey's daughter, Kaylee. Her remains were found, I think, less than a mile from their family home, and she was wrapped in a blanket with duct tape over her mouth. And based on the testimonies from the forensic pathologist in that case, her remains were in such an advanced state of decomposition when they found them that they could not determine an official cause of death. Now, the medical examiner at the time who studied Kaylee's bones was able to determine that the manner of death was homicide. And although Casey lied to investigators about nearly everything in terms of the whereabouts of her daughter, having traces of chloroform in her trunk, prosecutors had a very difficult time connecting her to the homicide because of that undetermined cause of death, right? They couldn't prove what caused her to die. Because let's say that her daughter died from an overdose of chloroform, which I think is most likely what happened because she'd rather party than take care of her toddler. But that's for another episode at a different time. If you had that definitive evidence that proved she died from that overdose of the chloroform, then you would have a much stronger case against her. So that's kind of what's happening with this story. We have remains that were found in this guy David's car, and they were in such an advanced state of decomposition, so much so that a cause of death was not able to be determined. The medical examiner officially labeled her cause of death as deferred. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we will never know the cause of death. Deferred just means it's pending additional investigation. But one thing we do know is that Celeste did not end up there naturally. Somebody put her in that front trunk. And based on the stage of decomposition she was in, experts are saying she was in there for several weeks in the trunk of a black car in LA in the summer. That car was essentially an oven. So not having an official cause of death is really what investigators are waiting on, I believe, before making an arrest. But that's involving the death of Celeste. But somebody moved her body to that front trunk. And I would imagine that whoever was behind doing that could potentially face abuse of a corpse charges, concealment of a body charges. I don't know if an arrest will be made for that. That is all still to be determined. Now, there are a lot of very odd and eerie coincidences in this story, but coincidences are not the same as proof, and they are not enough to arrest someone and charge them with committing a crime. I understand all that, and I'm not saying that these coincidences don't hold any value to a potential case down the road, because they definitely ironically line up with certain circumstances in a really weird way. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It definitely makes you raise your eyebrows hearing about some of these coincidences. However, the strange lyrics, the matching tattoos, the sound bites, they're unfortunately not enough to arrest someone and charge them criminally, no matter how strange and uncomfortable those details seem, because they certainly are strange. I mean, his lyrics in some of his songs are dark, but that is my speculation on why there hasn't been an arrest yet. And as I mentioned before, more and more information continues to come out literally every single day. Every time I look at my phone, there is a new development or a new piece of information. So no arrest yet. And keep in mind, David was never named a suspect or even a person of interest. Not having him as a suspect, I get, because they don't know if a crime was committed like homicide yet, but not even a person of interest. I think if there was decomposing human remains found in the trunk of anyone's car, hello, they are a person of interest until we determine otherwise, at the very least. But here's everything we know so far in terms of the timeline of events. On Wednesday, September 3rd, an abandoned Tesla with Texas plates was issued a citation for a 72-hour parking ordinance violation. 1 week prior, the car had been reported abandoned and had its tires marked by an officer. So what they do is mark an abandoned car's tires with chalk, I guess, to indicate how long it's been there. And basically when they revisit the car, if the chalk marks are still in the same spots after 72 hours, the car is officially marked abandoned, and the owner of the car may receive a citation at that point, which in this instance had already been issued. And at that point, the vehicle could be towed, and that's exactly what they did. On Friday, September 5th, the car was towed to Hollywood Tow, a tow yard on Mansfield Avenue in Los Angeles. To my understanding, this is pretty routine, especially in LA or really any of the big cities. If a car is abandoned or even parked for an extended period of time, it's going to be ticketed. There's a ton of parking regulations in LA, especially when it comes to street sweeping, things of that nature. They don't play around. They will very quickly ticket a car that's there for an extended period of time. Fast forwarding to Monday, September 8th, tow yard employees noticed a foul odor coming from the impounded Tesla. The smell was bad enough for them to immediately call law enforcement, and upon arriving, police opened the front trunk of this Tesla, which is a front compartment where the engine would be in a normal car, but Teslas don't have an engine, they just have a battery. So when you pop the front hood on this Tesla, it is a compartment with trunk space. This is where law enforcement discovered decomposing remains wrapped in plastic. These remains were in a significant stage of decomposition, and given the state of them, it was clear to investigators that the remains were in this front trunk for some time. This was a horrifying discovery for law enforcement, and they immediately ran the registration of this Tesla so that they could identify who this vehicle belonged to. Come to find out that it was registered to 20-year-old rising music star David Anthony Burke, also known as his artist name D4VD. So this certainly escalated very quickly, going from a pretty typical tow in a big city, rapidly turning into worldwide breaking news that millions of people have been following ever since, especially with the car belonging to one of the most popular and fastest growing music stars of today. It wasn't until Wednesday, September 17th, 10 days after the remains were discovered, that the LA County Medical Examiner's Office identified the remains and released the identity of the victim as 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Her age was initially reported to be 15. However, her birthday was on September 7th, which is one day after she was found. And I believe that when she passed, unfortunately, it was clear that she did not reach her 15th birthday, so she was 14. So as soon as the remains were identified, a search warrant was served later that evening to the home that David was renting out in the Hollywood Hills. Reports are saying that he was renting out this place for $20,000 a month, which is insane. But they searched the house, and it wasn't super clear exactly what they collected, but some electronics were collected along with several evidence bags. So they search the house, they get what they need. And this is another detail in all of this that people have always been confused about, including myself. They never named David a suspect or even a person of interest. Still haven't, at least at the time of this recording. Yet human remains were found in his car. He's not a suspect or person of interest, but we're going to search his house. Again, at the very least, I think you're a person of interest because there is a body in your car. That's not the same as a formal suspect, I don't think, but I'm not a lawyer. So days after the search, David and his manager break the lease on this house. And David's manager is the one who had the lease under his name. David has since been radio silent. He was on tour at the time that they discovered the remains of Celeste, and he has since canceled all of his shows that have been scheduled, and he has since lawyered up with criminal defense attorney Blair Burke, who has represented some pretty high-profile people, including Mel Gibson, Harvey Weinstein, Britney Spears, just to name a few. His manager has seemed to want nothing to do with any of this, even making a statement, quote, "This is the only time I'll speak on this matter. For now. This has been a tough time for my family, as I am a father of 3 children. I received no emails. I'm no one's roommate. I live full-time at home with my wife and kids. My daughter is 14, and this news is affecting so many lives. I have never received any emails. I had zero knowledge of anything, and I don't live in California. Also, I work remotely 95% of the time, and my job doesn't require me to have much interaction with any of my clients, David, as there are many others that work with him on a day-to-day capacity, not me. This news is tragic for so many and for her family. I hope the proper authorities get to the bottom of it soon. Let me remind people, a lot of this is speculation and alleged. In the meantime, I am with my family helping them emotionally get through the news of this tragedy. Please report on factual information." Now, that statement was in response to a TikTok video circulating that was posted by Girltown NJ. I think that was allegedly talking about this email sent to David's manager and some other accusations that prompted him to come out with that statement.
A family friend of Celeste Rivas Hernandez sent an email to Josh Marshall, who is David's manager and roommate, back in 2024, February 2024. And in the email was the missing persons report of Celeste and all of her information. And it said, "We know Celeste is living with you guys. She needs to return home." One day later, Celeste returned home. And then a month after that, she went back to living with David and his roommate, Josh Marshall. So Josh Marshall was well aware of Celeste Rivas Hernandez's age and that she was a missing child.
Prior to that statement, we've only heard his manager one other time say anything about this, and that was when he confirmed that David was cooperating with law enforcement. What's cooperating though? Hey, you can talk to my lawyer. I'm not throwing shade at him for having a lawyer. You should have a lawyer. She's obviously advising him to stay silent, probably. Now, I'm willing to bet that every single house in that Hollywood Hills neighborhood has security camera systems. The house that David and his manager were renting absolutely did. And you cannot enter or exit that house without being detected. I'm almost positive that that footage from those cameras is being looked at, especially around the time that they believe Celeste was placed in that Tesla. That is all part of the digital evidence that I think is really going to play a key part in figuring out how she ended up in the front trunk of that Tesla. Now, let's talk about that Tesla. The Tesla, I believe, is going to be a pivotal piece of evidence in terms of finding out when that front trunk was opened, when it was closed for the last time before it was abandoned, who was in and around that car surrounding the time that she ended up in it. A lot of that part of the timeline is still unclear, but once that data is uncovered, then investigators can start to build a better timeline and pinpoint, okay, this person had keyed access, this person opened the car at this date, at this time, so on and so on. Fortunately, the vehicle involved in this is essentially a treasure trove of data, and this is something that caught my attention quickly when I first heard about all of this, because Teslas store so much data. They store driving data, like who drove the car to that abandoned location. It also records camera footage, and it records user settings on their app, like who has keyed access to the vehicle. And I think questions like, well, who put her in this front trunk and who drove her to the location where the vehicle was left abandoned? Those questions can potentially be answered with the stored data of this Tesla. All of that stuff is recorded and stored. But here's the potential issue. It is all going to depend on if one setting was turned on, and that setting is Sentry mode. This is a security system in Teslas that monitors a parked and locked Tesla's cameras and sensors for any like suspicious activity, but it is not turned on by default. The user has to turn this on. And if it is on, then those clips are recorded and stored. So when we talk about someone driving this Tesla to that location where it was left abandoned, and even before that, opening this front trunk to place the body of Celeste in, if this feature is turned on, that is all on video. So do the police have this data? We don't know. They aren't saying. But if they do, that can clear up some crucial questions. Now, if Sentry mode is not turned on, then all you would get is recordings of the vehicle in motion as opposed to it being stationary. However, there might be some data that is retrievable in terms of where the car drove from before it ended up in that location it was abandoned, as well as the front trunk being closed for the last time. But it is really going to depend on if that data is still on the car or stored on the Tesla servers. There is a memory stick that lives inside of the vehicle, and this is where all of those recordings go to be stored if you have Sentry Mode turned on. Now, as long as that memory stick has not been removed from the car upon law enforcement obtaining the vehicle, then you can access all of those recordings. That's only if the memory stick has not been removed and wiped clean of all data, which can only be done by someone who has keyed access to that vehicle. And law enforcement is going to speak to anyone who had keyed access to that vehicle. They will be able to obtain that data pretty quickly, I imagine, in terms of what devices were signed in to the Tesla app to then unlock and lock that car. And they will be able to see the IP addresses associated with those devices. And you can start to narrow down all who could potentially come into contact with having access to that vehicle. And that is very important, especially if David is, for whatever reason, not responsible. And I'm not stating that he is or isn't, just raising that possibility. And I'm really hoping that Tesla plays ball here and hands over the data if it exists in their servers, because the Tesla could be the biggest piece of evidence if this turns into a homicide investigation. And like I said, it really, really depends on if Sentry Mode was turned on. Last thing on the Tesla, there has been some questioning surfacing around Celeste possibly putting herself in the vehicle. That couldn't have happened because, number one, you cannot open the trunk without a key, and the only way to have a key is to have keyed access through the app. Is essentially a digital key. The car also couldn't have been unlocked because Teslas, if you walk away from them without the key, it auto locks. So Tesla keeps a log of everyone who has keyed access to one of their vehicles, and it will be interesting to see who was on the list of David's Tesla if they ever make that information public. So for those who don't know about David or don't know about how he got started with music, he has a pretty interesting story on his journey as a musician. He really got started with music through gaming and actually would post his Fortnite clips on YouTube, but ran into some trouble with copyright strikes, and YouTube is notorious for being super strict with their copyright guidelines, and he was getting copyright strikes on his videos because he was using music that he did not own. And eventually he became really frustrated with this and decided that he was going to make his own music for these clips, and that's what he did. And to his surprise, his music exploded on TikTok after 2 of his songs went viral, those songs being Here With You and Romantic Homicide. Now, this is where internet sleuths did some digging when the news broke about a body being found in this popular music star's car, and they started to correlate some of those lyrics of his with events that were starting to unfold, with the most notable correlation being from one of his songs, Romantic Homicide. Here's some of those lyrics. Quote, "In the back of my mind, I killed you, and I didn't even regret it. I can't believe I said it, but it's true." Yeah, dark, like I said. But there is also the argument, of course, that this is art and it can't be taken literal. Hey, everybody do their own research. Everybody can come to their own conclusion and opinion on that. But how does Celeste come into all of this? For one, this wasn't the first time she was missing, and recently it was reported by TMZ that friends of David and Celeste confirmed that they believed the two were involved romantically, including Celeste's mother, who confirmed that her daughter was dating someone named David before she went missing. Live streams of the two allegedly together have surfaced, as well as a picture of David in the neighborhood where Celeste went missing, not to mention an unreleased song titled Celeste. Now, while there is a mountain of speculation about how involved David is in the death of Celeste, one thing is for sure. Celeste was 13 years old at the time that they were believed to start becoming involved with each other, which would make him 18 or 19. That's illegal. In some states, it's not, if the parents are okay with it, but her parents were not. And the digital evidence will be able to tell us more about their specific involvement. We just don't have those details yet. That is going to take time to go through. But one thing is also certain, Celeste is unfortunately not here anymore. And somebody is responsible for putting her inside of that front trunk. We don't know how she passed. Maybe it was an accidental death. Maybe she overdosed. But somebody is responsible for putting her in that front trunk. And that somebody needs to be held accountable so that Celeste can have justice. Putting together a timeline in any case is crucial because from there you can start to pinpoint timestamps of events and determine when and where people were during those times. And like I said before, I think the digital evidence in this case is going to be crucial, both in the Tesla like we talked about and in the digital footprints of Celeste and David. And all online activity has to be looked at. That includes Twitch, Snapchat, Instagram, Discord, YouTube, Roblox. That is a lot of data to comb through. It's going to take time. Now, at the time of this recording, there has not been an official cause of death or manner of death like we talked about. And once we do get the exact cause and manner of death, if we ever do get that, this case, I think, is really going to explode. The digital evidence will help narrow down the time of death. And from there, pieces of the puzzle can really start to come together, I think. Like who was in the area at the time? Was there an ongoing tour at this time? Who had access to the Tesla? Who was in and out of the Tesla? Who was in and out of that home? I can guarantee you that all of this is being looked at. This story has so many unanswered questions, and I think as a society, myself included, we are not good with waiting for answers, especially when it comes to a high-profile investigation like this. But the frustrating part in this is going to be the waiting. We will stay tuned for any updates. However, that'll do it for this episode. I appreciate you tuning in as always. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast services. Until next time.